All right, hi everyone. I'm Nicole Peterson, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for our SMA IAJO speaker session entitled Mitigating Information in a Contested Environment, Frontline Experience from the Western Balkans. I'd also like to thank today's speaker, Mr. John Cappello, for taking the time to present today. So before we begin, I have a few quick housekeeping items. So we'll be having a virtual Q&A session at the conclusion of the brief. So during the brief or during the Q&A, feel free to submit your questions through the live event Q&A chat. It's 2 overlapping speech bubbles and 1 as a question mark. Also be sure to type in your name and affiliation before you submit your question, or if you prefer for your name to not be on the record, you can go ahead and submit your question anonymously. You can also vote on which questions you'd like to be addressed most by hitting the like button next to that question. So now I'm going to briefly introduce today's speaker before he begins. Mr. Cappello is a founding partner and chief operations officer of the Balkan Security Network, which is a media entity project of the Euro-Atlantic Initiative, which specializes in defense and security information projects and disinformation analysis and response in the Western Balkans. In this capacity, he's also responsible for project strategic development, liaising with regional and international partners, fundraising, monitoring and evaluation, and developing partnerships. He's also a 25-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force and served as the U.S. Air Force attaché to the U.S. embassies in Tel Aviv, Israel, and in Belgrade, Serbia, and as a political military officer at the headquarters in U.S. European Command in Stuttgart, Germany. So, Mr. Cappello, without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Unmute. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, and to all the organizers of the SMA Speaker Series, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to take the next 30 minutes or so to share with you some observations and some practical experiences of operating in the Western Balkans and dealing with disinformation in this extremely complex environment. At the end of this, I hope you'll take away a better understanding of this environment, the challenges of operating within the environment, and how our proactive approach of building fact-based narratives across a wide spectrum and among various topic areas can actually help to counter disinformation. I'm going to discuss 3 lines of effort. One, which Nicole mentioned, the Balkan Security Network, which is a news portal which creates and disseminates fact-based defense and security analysis, news and analysis to the mainstream media, and it reaches millions around the region. The second I'm going to talk about is the Halyard Mission Foundation, which focuses on historical connections and shares these narratives in building relations based on this shared history between the United States and the Serbian people. And finally, community level activities, where we've working with individuals and organizations at community levels where they've identified challenges within their communities, and we help to develop plans, find support, and implement solutions. In this process, we build networks, strong networks, large networks of organizations, and narratives, which is important to this conversation. I hope that you're going to see that while the Western Balkans information space environment is highly challenging and vulnerable to outside influences, there are opportunities. And to shift these dynamics by adapting preemptive solutions and providing a flow of credible information. This is key. Credible information still matters. Solely responding to disinformation campaigns is not enough, and using propaganda to counter propaganda doesn't work. We have to find a proactive approach of developing, disseminating fact-based narratives that could help to counter disinformation. So a few words about this most challenging environment. While back in DC conducting some research and work on Russian activities in Syria, it became clear, we began to see an increasing boldness in the Russian activities in the Western Balkans. They see this as an environment in which the Kremlin could take the opportunity to undermine the United States, the European Union, and NATO. I mean, why here? Why the Balkans? I don't think this is a coincidence, and it's certainly not an accident. The region is still not stable or fully integrated into Euro-Atlantic institutions and has multiple vulnerabilities. Societies remain fragile, and there are numerous internal divisions. Institutional frameworks are weak, and territorial disputes continue and have not been solved. Disinformation campaigns in the Western Balkans are highly effective and threaten to continue this instability by disrupting the EU and NATO integration efforts of Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Northern Macedonia, and of course Montenegro. The campaign reaches millions on a daily basis with a high percentage of content focusing on defense and security, and this is important. The disinformation messages vary widely, but there are common themes, and these themes include demonizing the United States, demonizing the European Union and NATO, along with various other ethnic groups within the region, amplifying threat perceptions of Serbs and Orthodox Slavs, conjuring speculation of renewed armed conflict in the region, promoting Russian military might, for example, speculating that the Russians might deploy surface-to-air missile systems to protect Serbia or establish military bases to protect Serbs. During the COVID crisis, we saw this continue, where the Russian military, or as opposed to military superiority, Russian medical superiority was on display and touted, while the West was characterized as bumbling, disorganized, unable to protect its populations against the disease. A high percentage of disinformation content, as I mentioned, is defense and security related, aimed at amplifying these continued threat perceptions, ethnic tensions, building on the legacy of war, and anti-Western sentiments. Those who distribute disinformation are successful because they explain and exploit shortcomings and lack of expertise within the local media space here. The legacy of conflict is complicated by the ongoing NATO peacekeeping operation with troops on the ground and these unresolved territorial disputes. Other foreign powers are active. The Russians, the Chinese seek to gain advantages and build their presence. The information environment remains highly dysfunctional. It's highly tabloidized and clickbait rules, while the media literacy rate in the region is among the lowest in Europe. All this makes the region extremely susceptible to the malign outside influences in the information space. And all of this adds to the complexity of the environment that we're operating in. So given all of this, once the Kremlin decided to increase its activities in the information space and launched a concerted disinformation campaign, it easily penetrated the mainstream media and was able to reach millions every single day. So given these multiple vulnerabilities, reacting, denying lies and distortions, and playing defense, it can't win. It's not enough. So it was clear that a new approach was necessary, and Western institutions spend a lot of time, a lot of effort analyzing, monitoring, measuring, and observing the disinformation problem in the Balkans. And this is important. I mean, we have to have good analysis to understand what the challenges are. But I would argue that these were limited efforts, and they have not developed sufficient solutions. Some reactive measures are taken. We have fact checking and the stop fake efforts. And again, these are important efforts. They provide important feedback and important information, but their impact, I would argue, is limited. It takes days or weeks to analyze and respond to disinformation, which consistently puts you on the outside of the curve, and we're always a step behind, always responding. As in kinetic warfare, you can't keep pace with an adversary action by waiting to react. There's a school of thought that talks about once disinformation is out there, that it's already had an effect and the damage is already done. So responding to it just multiplies that and amplifies that effect. While there are certainly lies that need to be addressed, and we could think of many examples, I continue to maintain this is not the most effective or efficient way to deal with disinformation. So we established an organization to take a proactive approach, and that's the Balkan Security Network. And it's made up of local media communication experts, veteran journalists, and defense and security analysts and experts. The key operating word here is local. The team was established to be proactive, to generate fact-based content for distribution to the mainstream media. And the content and narratives are tailored to resonate with audiences and with editors within the media space. Simple, appealing, newsworthy, these are all criteria for the for the information that we produce. Catchy, usable by the media, tailored to be consumed by the media, consumed by the editors who are looking for content on a consistent basis. And this worked. I'll share an early example with you. In order to prove the concept about a year and a half ago, I took the team to Camp Bondsteel in Kosovo, which of course you know is the US Army headquarters for forces in KFOR. The goal was to conduct an interview with the commander of KFOR to see what the roles and responsibilities of the US forces in Kosovo were. Seemingly a basic background type of a story. However, the team asked questions in a way that addressed the interests of the editors and consumers, the audience within the region. The story resonated. And a few days later, after it was published, it exploded. I mean, all throughout the region. It was published on the front pages of most of the major outlets within Serbia and within the region, including those, and this is the most important part, including those who tend to publish disinformation the most. These are the audiences we're after. We're not trying to preach to the choir. We're seeking to gain access to the audiences that are affected and exposed to disinformation. So we want to provide fact-based information in an effort to normalize the information space by accessing these various outlets. And this is how we approach each and every story that we produce. Fact-based, tailored to resonate with the media editors so that they could use it and with audiences. We've had continued success with this approach. Stories are republished on a regular basis throughout the region, in Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Northern Macedonia, Montenegro, and beyond. BSN has become a credible source for fact-based narratives, including with outlets that predominantly publish disinformation and deal in sensationalism. And this, again, is the goal, to reach those audiences. There's instances, and I'll share another, outside the region. In August of last year, we did a story on what the heck?
John, are you there? There we go.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm back. Sorry, I don't know what happened. I think I left off on there's
John,
some
this is
instances of
Todd.
our work going.
Yeah,
Yes.
you were just leading into your second example, and that's when
Okay.
we lost the video. Thank you.
Got it. Yes. So the second example was reach outside the region. Last year, we were doing a story about China's desire to sell an advanced surface air missile system, the FK3, to Serbia. The story ended up all around the Balkans, in Western Europe. Reuters picked it up, which led it to be published and referenced in the New York Times and other mainstream medias in Moscow, the Middle East, and within China. The Chinese Communist Party outlets actually picked it up and referenced it. So this is an additional result. Some of our pieces continue to be translated and published by groups of international organizations, the Russian media included. So my argument stands that the need for credible, quality content exists. We continue. BSN is currently providing unique and essential service, I believe, to the mainstream media by providing newsworthy, quality content on defense and security. It's simple, but it's effective. So just to wrap this section up, I want to reiterate 4 lessons learned. First, while internationally supported, we received support from NATO Public Diplomacy, Dutch Embassy, and some others. The main lift has to come from the region itself. Empowering local voices to produce this quality, fact-based news and analysis, these narratives proactively is key. The team is all local, experienced journalists, editors, and analysts. We're working to groom and train younger members as well, members that want to be journalists and analysts. The second, while every item we published over the last 2 years has been republished and rebroadcast, every single one, the reach is limited. It's still limited. Changing dynamics, we're changing the dynamics in a very small way, and it's a question of scale. The capacity of production and the size of the team is limited due to resources. And so we're not limited due to capacity, we're just limited due to resources. So we could scale this, and we have plans to scale this to reach not just focusing on news and analysis, but across the spectrum. There's a tremendous amount of room for growth, whether it's in social media space, YouTube, podcasts. We've got, besides editors, analysts, and journalists, we have videographers that are prepared to come on board. So there's, it's easy to reach additional audiences. Audiences are interested. They're exposed to disinformation on a daily basis, and there's a need for alternatives. The third item I would leave you with here in this section is we're currently operating, and I mentioned this earlier, we're currently operating in an environment constrained by over-analysis, and we're reactive. Fact-checking and stop fakes, again, are important, but they don't provide the stories, they don't provide the narratives that are necessary to be proactive and to be present in the information space. They produce denials, but denials are not stories, they're not narratives. And I don't believe what audiences want to hear or what they need to hear. And finally, defense and security issues are 100% one-sided here in the region. There's an audience for this content for many of the reasons I mentioned earlier. There are emotional issues, and we've given the 1990s, but also we've defined security broadly to cover a wide range of relevant issues, including border security, migration, disaster relief. So these are issues that impact people's lives on a daily basis. So the second line of effort I'd like to talk about is the Halyard Mission Foundation. And the foundation was founded over 5 years ago to educate, commemorate, and increase awareness of the Halyard Mission, which was the rescue of over 500 American airmen during the Second World War. I first learned of this rescue mission when I was assigned to the United States Embassy as the Air Force attaché. As a pilot, I knew about the raids to bomb Polesti oil fields during the Second World War. Many of you have probably heard of these also. But many of the aircraft that flew those raids were damaged and the crews ended up bailing out or crash landing in and around this region in Serbia. And I did not know the extent that the Serbs played in the rescue of over 500 American airmen, one of the, if not the largest rescue of Americans from behind enemy lines. So we understood there's room to talk about other issues in the information space. We don't have to focus primarily on kind of the traditional news and analysis, and we could use these historical narratives, these stories that are important to people, they're emotional. And how did we do this? We did this by telling the story of these historic connections. And it grew from beyond the Second World War stories to the First World War. There's a tremendous connection between the United States and Serbia as well that people don't understand. Many Serbs that lived in the United States at the turn of the century came back, over 10,000 came back to fight for Serbia during the First World War. The king at the time after the war granted any of those who wanted to stay land, and there are communities now in northern Serbia, in Banat and Vojvodina, that are founded by the descendants of those volunteers. And so it's another story, of inspiring story of courage, of sacrifice, of shared ideals and values. And it provides opportunity to connect between two people. And it's an important story that gets us away from focusing on the 1990s and the exploitation of the West is not your friend, the United States is not your friend. But in fact, there are a strong sense of shared history. So history resonates with people. I mean, people are proud of their history. We're proud of our history as Americans, yes. It's catchy for the media. It provides important for governments. It builds bridges for future discussions. And we've seen this over and over again. There's pride in what the Serbs did. They want to be accepted by the West, and this is a bridge. This is an avenue to have these conversations. There's multiple ways to tell the story, not just in the traditional media. We've established historical markers that are around historically significant places where the rescue mission took place, documentary film production, yearly commemoration ceremonies, a construction of a permanent memorial site on one of the airfields where the rescue mission took place. Having President Vučić and Ambassador Anthony Godfrey stand on the same field and talk about the same message and the importance of this historical connection and the importance of our relationship, I think shows the importance of having these using these historic connections as a continued example of our shared history. Last year, actually, President Dodik from the Republic of Srpska attended the annual ceremony. So he was there, and many of you know, a lot of nationalist sentiment, a lot of nationalist rhetoric, but the fact is, in discussions with people around him, he sees the value in this narrative. He sees the value in improving relations between the United States and the Serbian people, the Republic of Srpska. And he sees this as a potential opportunity to do so. Not to overstate it, but to point to the fact that these historic connections can help to build a bridge. And there's a number of others. These two are two of our primary efforts within the Hollywood Mission Foundation. And then finally, in the last few minutes I have left, I'll talk a little bit about the final line of effort, which is working at community level activities. As we worked on developing and telling these historic stories and going around Serbia, we developed numerous relations within communities, with schools, with churches, with municipality leaders and other community leaders. And we understood that there are a lot of activities out there that can be supported. So we expanded our activities. We expanded to work with communities. We've identified individuals and organizations that are working within their own communities to identify challenges and assist them to develop plans, find support, and implement solutions. We kind of try to keep it simple. So we worked to identify two different groups, right? There's groups with needs, and then there's groups with needs and capacity. You could say groups with needs, disabled homes, old age homes, hospitals, and then you have those with needs and capacity. So also schools, sports teams, music schools, and we tried to assist those, but not just one-offs, not just to go someplace and help somebody, give somebody something. As an example, we worked with a kickboxing club in Vranje in South Serbia. We selected this because it's a multi-ethnic, so they have Serbs, Albanians, and Roma. That the kids all work together boxing. After we helped them, they became motivated and worked with another sports club within their region and also with an orphanage. So you build networks. Another example, we had the music school. We provided them with some instruments so that they could practice and train, and they then went to with our assistance. We act as the kind of the connective tissue between these organizations. They went to an old age home, gave a concert, worked with some orphans to teach them music. So we established some networks of organizations that work together, and it's not just about the activities. These activities are in fact content. They're producing stories, or producing important stories that, again, because of our relationships with the media across the spectrum, are published across the media space. So again, even in these highly tabloidized outlets, they'll be telling positive stories of what we're doing, of what the Hollywood Mission Foundation is doing, of what we're doing at a community level. So these things resonate. They're not just human interest stories, but by assisting local communities, we're not just providing humanitarian assistance for capacity building or economic development, but we're providing positive stories at our pace and showing that the United States is in fact a good partner. And again, I would argue this resonates and it has a positive presence. I think I've got 5 more minutes left, and I'll wrap it up by just suggesting that what makes this work? Presence and persistence. We're here. We're doing it. We're working with networks. We've got specialized teams to work each of these lines of effort. And we work to expand partnerships and want to work with like-minded institutions and individuals, whether here or back home. I mean, and that's where the support and the is essential. I see this as all three lines of effort are pillars that support the same structure, and the roof of that structure is influence, right? The roof of that structure is how do we change attitudes and perceptions? How do we operate within this information battle, and how do we influence people in a positive light towards the United States and the West? Built on a solid foundation of experience, networks, and established relations, these three pillars, the Balkan Security Network, we're working in the media space, Halyard Mission Foundation, working with historical narratives and working at the community level, establish this and build networks, partnerships, which help change attitudes and perceptions, and in the end achieve what U.S. hopes to do, a stable Serbia that it will meet its strategic goal of joining the European space. So I think with that, I will be very happy to answer questions or continue this conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello. So we are going to move on to our Q&A portion of the team session. So feel free to keep submitting your questions through the live event Q&A chat as we go. All right, so our first question is, how do you plan to counter the issue of bias with facts? In other words, one of the primary methods of misinformation is to question the validity of facts. So how do we maintain credibility when fact interpretation is already mistrusted?
Yeah, that's I mean, this is a struggle everywhere, right? We had this conversation in the United States. Look, I think the way we do it is to continue to focus on the facts. I mean, I know that I don't mean that to be a trite answer, but that's I think that's the true answer. Is as an example, using these, the disinformation narrative will be the United States is not a friend. The NATO, United States bombed you. They're not they're not your partners. Historically, you've always been close to Russia, Slavic Orthodox Brotherhood. Well, okay, but the facts are that during the Second World War, Serbs had a very complex relationship, and a good portion of that was aimed at doing very, very positive things for the United States. And it wasn't just the royalist forces, as an example, right? It was the partisan as well. So you had General Mihailovich help save 500, but during the course of the war, over 1,200 American airmen were saved. That's a tremendous story, and that's a fact. I'm not making that up. I'm not exaggerating it. This is what happened. This is the history, right? And those tried to interpret the history differently, but we've seen a change, right? Actually, the story of the Halyard mission was suppressed for many years because Tito did not want that story to come out because it took place by his enemy, who we executed after the war. But facts are facts, right? And today, as opposed to when I first started, the office of the presidency was pretty ambivalent about this story. They didn't prevent us from focusing on it, but they weren't excited. And as I said, last year, the last 2 years, President Vučić was standing with the U.S. ambassador out on the field discussing this. So I think if you continue to focus on facts, you're proactive about it. We're not being reactive. I'm not responding to lies and disinformation. I'm trying to be proactive and put our story. We forget how to tell our story sometimes, and it's a positive one. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Thank you, Mr. Cappello.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the next question I'm going to turn over to Mr. Chadvizi, the director of SMA. And he has a question about your information environment analysis leading to operations in the information environment planning. Could you share your organization's approach to IE tradecraft or research and the OIE planning process to develop your activities?
So yeah, it's pretty simple. I think the simple answer is that there was a void, and the void was filled by outside malign actors, and that was clear. That didn't take a lot of deliberate analysis. You just have to. I wanted to share a couple of photos from the newsstand. On a daily basis, the information environment here is so dysfunctional, and there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, when we first started this, people asked, politically, is this going to fly? Are they going to let you, publish these types of stories, this type of news and analysis? And we pushed forward because what we did when we did an analysis, we saw that certainly there's political aspects to control of the media, or influence within the media, I should say, but there's also an economic issue and an economic imperative. The media is under such pressure to produce content continuously, and it has such great shortfalls, and those shortfalls have resulted in a void. And that void was filled initially by Sputnik. Sputnik came here, and they didn't grow their office over the last 2 years to 30 or 40 people because Belgrade is such a great place, which it happens to be. But that's not why Sputnik is growing. It's growing because their process works. They distribute content directly to the media in the local language for free, and the media gobbles it up. And it didn't take a lot of in-depth analysis to understand that and to see how that process works. And we have some kind of slides that talk through that, but I wanted to focus on kind of the practical aspects of what we're doing. Again, I would suggest, that you have to be in it to win it. But now we're at a point to grow this deliberately. I think it does take a lot more deliberate analysis to see what works, what doesn't, to fine tune messaging. But I am reticent to slow down how we're acting, how we're operating. Paralysis by analysis. I think this is a good example. The Western Balkans is a good example of that. If you have a follow-on to that, I'm happy to address it. But I think the simple answer is that we started operating and then kind of felt our way through.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello, and thank you, Todd, for the question. The next question I want to pose is from Major Kyle Sullivan, and the question is the information operations strategy aligned across the European theater or broken into regions or country to country?
So that's a good, that would be a good question for your bosses, over in UCOM. I from where I sit, and I don't mean this to sound I'm not disparaging or criticizing. I don't see a coherent strategy from where I sit. I know, having served on UCOM staff, that we spend a lot of time there working on regional strategies, right, and breaking it up into subsections. And I have no doubt that UCOM has a deliberate communication plan. But I think part of this, the SMA, part of the IIJO effort here is understanding where information fits in, what is the Department of Defense role in the information space, in the information battle. And I would agree that we have not figured that out yet. So I'm not dodging, but I think I'm operating kind of in the trench, I'm fighting the 50 meter targets here. I would like to believe that there's a coherent and rational strategy. But if I look at funding streams and funding sources, I would argue that I'm not seeing what that coherence is. And again, not to be overly critical, I would hope to reach out to UCOM folks and have a serious conversation of what we're seeing, what we're doing, and however we could assist or any other folks in DoD or state that are interested in this. But I'm not involved in that process directly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello. So we'll turn back to the Balkan Security Network's efforts more specifically now. Robert McCrate from NDU asks, what is the focus of counter-propaganda and PSYOPs efforts by BSN aimed at elites, students, educators, and universities? And how do Russian and Chinese disinformation campaigns differ?
So, yeah, that's a good question. We initially focused on the mainstream media space. So that means everybody who uses the mainstream media, and the goal initially was not so much to define the audience as it was to obtain access to the media space, because we thought that would be the biggest challenge, and it turns out that actually was a lot easier than we thought it would be. The second piece then is determining, given the fact that we're operating at a fairly basic operational level right now, we're producing news analysis on a weekly basis. We want to get to the point where we're producing news daily, infographics. I mean, we want to scale, but where we are right now, given our limited resources, we're producing news analysis. So we had to make the calculation: what issues, where do we spend our limited resources most wisely? Our analysis points to the fact that the two areas of disinformation most weaponized, if you will, by the outside influencers are daily politics, which we want to avoid, and defense and security issues. And again, for the reasons that I mentioned, the defense and security issues are still very emotional and relevant here. We decided, because that's where our expertise lies as well, to focus on producing, and again, not countering disinformation directly, but being as proactive as possible, finding stories and putting out stories that do two things: that normalize the information space. So people are as another example, stories about Serbia's roles in peacekeeping operations around the world. There were no stories about that. That's significant, first of all, from the Serbs' perspective, but there were no stories about that. Right? The stories are how the Croats and Albanians are an enemy, or about to attack. NATO's falling apart. Russia is strong. This sensational type of story. So we decided to focus on providing, normalizing the space by providing just basic stories about defense and security within Serbia and within the region, which we find that there is an appetite for. And then the second thing is being proactive. So as another example, maybe there's a deployment of specific units from the United States to KFOR, which might be exploited by outside disinformation. But by trying to be proactive and just giving the facts about the unit from so-and-so is deploying here, and it's just because it says special forces, it doesn't mean that they're hiding underground tanks and nuclear weapons, but this is the way was formed. This is why it's here. This is its roles and responsibilities. This level of reporting, this level of analysis, while basic, has been absent, and so has been the focus.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello. Someone that goes by Week or WIECK from JECC has asked, as an MOE indicator, have you seen any actions by Russia or their proxy groups to disrupt your operations or belittle or attack your writers?
Not yet. We're waiting. There's we were potential supporters, and we're very concerned about that, and we were initially as well. One of the ways we mitigated against that was being transparent, open, and clear about what we were doing. So we made, very early in the process, we sat with officials at the Ministry of Defense, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, within the administration, communication offices, to let them know what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it. This cannot, and this is something I probably should have said more in the body of my presentation. This is not packaged or approached as a counter-disinformation, anti-Russia process. That does not fly here. That does not work. This is an effort to help normalize the information by providing fact-based news and analysis, which is really needed. And officials within the government understand that. They do understand that. They understand there needs to be some balance, that things are out of kilter a little bit. Not everybody does, and not everybody supports what we're doing, certainly. But by being transparent, by being open about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and focusing on improving the relationship, right? All of these things, again, are part of a pillar. I mean, we've been focused a little bit in the last couple questions on BSN, but I would argue that those other two pillars are as important, and they fit together to achieve the end result, which is what? It's not. It's influence, right? Information is to influence, and so it's to help influence attitudes and perceptions, so that the United States is seen as a positive partner, and it's seen as in a positive light.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello. Someone else is asking if you, as a part of BSN, engage in investigative exposure work, particularly identifying websites, social media networks, and other entities and information and individuals that spread Russian disinformation and propaganda.
So that's a really good question, and that's something that we're not doing right now. Again, because it's not because we don't want to necessarily, but because of our limited resources right now, and our need to focus to maintain our quality. Excuse me. And there are a few other organizations that are doing that well. There's a couple of other organizations, Burn and some others, that do also investigative journalism, not necessarily focused on corruption and crime and that type of activity, which again they do very good work. But in terms of investigating what outlets are producing in disinformation and where the sources of the disinformation come from. Look, we did, during our initial analysis, we did that, and we have some insights as to answer that, but that's not the focus of our work right now. It's not to say it shouldn't be, and we might change, but again, I think the key here is being proactive in producing content and narratives that help us achieve the desired end state and the desired end goals. And where what you're asking is kind of it's important information to know and understand. It's not the primary method to get us where we want to go.
All right, thank you. So now Russ R. at the National Intelligence University has asked, you ended your talk speaking about influence over attitudes and beliefs. How do you determine your effectiveness, and how do you measure for a level of influence?
Yeah, that's a that's a question we ask ourselves every day. And you know, of course, if you ask that question, you know how difficult it is to do that. That is, we struggle with it, and even by doing polling, and if we see a shift in attitudes and perceptions, is it because of what we wrote or the activities we conducted, or was it because the sun was shining? I mean, this is really, really difficult to quantify, and that's not a cop out, but it is it's a realization that we have not cracked that code yet. We have some ideas and some plans to do some more quantitative analysis after we've got some ideas on doing some work in the near future, focus on certain areas in the country, doing some work, and then doing maybe some polling to see if the needle moves. But it's a difficult proposition, and quite frankly, if you have any ideas or suggestions, I would love to hear them and be in contact to discuss that further, because that is key. Look, anecdotally, I could talk for another hour about the positive responses we've had, about significant positive responses we've had, both at local levels, community levels, and within the government. So I could say with certainty that we're having an effect. But strategically, what does that mean, right? And this is it's a big challenge. So, and I'm happy to share the difference between our anecdotal observations and what we should be doing with respect to some sort of quantitative analysis. That's a good question. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello. I also want to give credit to Lieutenant Commander Marcus Garcia, who also asked how you measure success and what metrics you're using. All right, so the next question comes from Diana, and this question is, she stated that you have an interesting perspective on media literacy and fact-based reporting. However, she can imagine that there are some limitations coming from the U.S. military. USAID has had a long history in building media capacity and fact-based investigative journalism, as well as working with civil society organizations to push back on social media platforms. So what efforts have been made to work up with the interagency to scale up?
So just so everybody's, I mean, I no longer work for the government, or actually, I don't work directly for the government either. We consult with the embassy here. We try to work in parallel to achieve common objectives. I try hard to keep in contact with colleagues in Washington, both in Department of Defense and state. But I think sometimes, yeah, okay, I'll just leave it at that. We try hard to work and to be part of the solution. So I think what I think should be happening is that there should be, we bandy about these terms, all of government, interagency, and I'm afraid that from, again, my perspective, sitting here in Belgrade, doing this on a daily basis, I am not seeing the effects of the big interagency discussions and decisions here at my level, and I know important discussions are taking place. So I'm again not being critical. I'm just being observational, and I would love to have conversations with those that are focused on the Balkans, and want to want to be involved in the information space, influence space here, because I think from a practical perspective, we have some things to share, and I'd like to hear their inputs on directions and desired end states as well. But yeah, I would like to see way more effort on understanding what the role of the interagency, of the all of government approach means when we talk about information and influence operations. And in the Western Balkans, this is, it's essential that we're doing this here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cappello. The next question that I'll pose is from Adam D. from US CENTCOM, and he asks, how does an organization, public, private, multinational, determine the appropriate balance of centralized messaging and counter messaging and decentralized theme-based messaging that may not be as coordinated and synchronized?
Yeah, that again is that's a really, really good question. And I think it will be even more relevant as we scale, because you know, I mentioned what I see as our limited impact given the scale at which we're doing this, right? If I had my druthers, I would have a lot more money and you know, quadruple the number of people that are working with me, because I know we would have a greater impact. But then that then the question is, where's the balance that you're asking about? You know, we have found from our experience thus far, decentralization and allowing our partners and our networks to do the heavy lifting is really key. People don't want to hear a guy from NATO talking about how great NATO is. That's not what they want to hear here, you know. But they are interested, and we just did a project in Bosnia-Herzegovina, sponsored by NATO, on making conversations about national security issues more accessible to youth defined 18 to 35. So we focused on universities, young leaders. So we went around to 6 different universities in 6 different locations in Bosnia-Herzegovina and held roundtables discussing these issues. But we didn't do it, again, with an American or a NATO person talking about these issues. We did it by addressing what issues, first of all, resonate there. So migration issues, border security, alliances, regional alliances and cooperation were issues that we talked about. And we didn't do it, again, from outside, but we used regional experts. So we had defense and security experts from Croatia, from Romania, from Serbia, from Slovenia, come and talk to those folks, and Bosnians as well, talk to the folks in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the conversation that ensued was, I thought, you know, we learned each time, each iteration got better, but it was substantive because it was a conversation based on kind of mutual interests. And so my point is, that was a long way to answer your question. I think right now we're finding that decentralization, working with local colleagues, partners, and enabling them to tell the stories has the best results. I mean, I could see, look, but I don't think that's mutually exclusive from coordinating or working with national leadership, right? Again, I'm not in the United States government, and I don't work for the government. I don't implement U.S. national policy, But everything we're doing here with these three pillars, with these three lines of effort, is working towards improving relations between the United States and Serbia and enabling them to achieve their strategic objective of integrating to European space, which is U.S. national policy, right? It's U.S. Objective to have a stable and secure Balkans region and a Europe that's whole, free, and at peace. So it's not mutually exclusive. I mean, I don't think you have to be centralized messages or decentralized messages. I think these things I'm thinking a little out loud. I think these things should be connected more fluidly. Thanks for your question.
All right, thank you for your answer. All right, so the next question is, how does normalized content compete with sensational content from a news consumer perspective?
Well, I mean, sensationalism is always works, right? I mean, and so you'll see it's in the same in a publication that is constantly, tabloid, big headlines, clickbait. They'll run on the second or third page a story that we submitted to them. Whether it's about an exercise that the United States is having with Serbia, or Serbian exercise with Romania, or a narrative having to do with the volunteers or Halyard. So how does it compete? I think you got to be present. You got to be in it to win it, right? And so I think sensationalism and sensational content is so prevalent because there's been such a void for so long that it's kind of the norm. I think that there's a desire and an appetite for good quality fact-based content. And how do I know that? Because, like I said, everything we're doing is being republished, rebroadcast. Now, where's that? Here's the level of hype and sensationalism, and here we are. Here there's a lot of room still to, when we start getting here, what's the pushback going to be? And I think that's when your question becomes more relevant. And I think it depends. Look, I think the pendulum has swung, and this is something that I do need to do more analysis on. The pendulum has swung to where the media space has become almost too dysfunctional, and there's a desire to see it normalize a little bit more. And I think we happen to be in a good place right now because we're providing that content, as are some others, like I said. But in terms of defense and security, I'm not aware of anyone else doing the kind of work we're doing in the defense and security field.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello. So we do have, we've got about 4 more questions, and Mr. Cappello has granted us 15 extra minutes to go over with Q&A. So I think that we'll go ahead and address these last few questions with our remaining time.
Sure.
So the first question I'll pose out of these is from Lieutenant Commander Marcus Garcia from the U.S. Navy. And he says, it's enlightening to hear about your grassroots effort that you've kicked off and the creativity in which you've shown and discussed. He says he's curious about citizens in the Balkans and whether they process facts or how they process facts and expertise. Do they have the same growing problem with the disdain of experts and demonstrable facts that we're seeing in the West?
Look, I think, I mean, my general answer is, people are the same everywhere, kind of. And then my different analysis is, man, there's as many conspiracy theorists here as anywhere. So, but having said that, this region, going back to my opening about the history of the region, there's such a level of distrust from outsiders, the recent history in the 90s. So it takes effort to build that level of trust. But I think it's certainly not insurmountable, and it's not the biggest challenge that I feel we face here. And I think you mitigate and you address those concerns, that issue, that the idea of expertise by building trust and rapport, by being present, by discussing things of interest to people, and then when you share a fact, look, when people see, when we talk about the Hired Mission and we visit villages, really rural places, people salt of the earth. The fact that we're paying attention to this, acknowledging it, and are present, not just once, but every year, every few months, that changes the way they process other information. I see it. So, they may be skeptical. Oh, you guys bombed us in 1999. But then when I share, well, but here we are doing this or that, and we're cooperating here and we're cooperating there, it has changed their mental math and then mental gymnastics. Again, I go back to the other question: how do we measure that? And how do we show the bang for the buck? Sometimes, again, not to be flippant, sometimes you can't do that all the time. And if we're going to sit around and wait to measure everything, then we won't do anything.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello. The next question is from Rob McCrade again from NDU. And he asks, how do Serbs and Bosniaks react to NATO membership on their borders with Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, etc.? Importantly, are the Russians exploiting the history of the bloody Balkan Wars in the 1990s?
Big time. Yeah, that's the biggest thing that they exploit. Again, the culture, religion, the Slavic Orthodox connection, which I would argue is overstated. There's other Slavs and Orthodox in the region that don't portend to have the same close essential relationship with Russia. But more importantly, the 1990s. This is a challenge for both sides too. If you talk to people who are not familiar with the Balkans in the West, they immediately conjure up images of the 90s and the war and all of those, the challenges of that conflict. So directly, yes, that is a big source of their of the disinformation and their narratives, their anti-West, anti-NATO, anti-EU narratives. Consistently, you bombed us, you ripped away Kosovo, you ripped away Kosovo. These are the predominant narratives and fallbacks. Because when you have nothing positive, then it's easy. These are easy tropes. These are easy messages to lob out there. Yeah. Did I miss the first part of the question, or did I cover the whole thing?
It seems as though you covered the whole thing, and I accidentally just deleted the question since it had already since we already addressed it. So hopefully you did.
Okay.
All right. So the next question is, someone's wondering if you at the Balkan Security Network have considered giving people the facts and just letting them interpret themselves without a narrative.
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, one of the things we want to do is produce infographics, as an example, to use on social media, where you're providing information, you're providing data, statistics, and putting that out there. We're limited right now, again, by not by the capacity to produce that stuff. We know a lot of what we want to do, but capacity of funding the production of it. In terms of putting direct facts into the mainstream media, quite frankly, that's one of the problems that we have, and the reason why positive information about the West, about the United States, isn't out there, because we have these droll, bland press releases. This happened on this date, and this is, and when you get the press release from the Ministry of Defense or from the Department of Defense, the media rolls it up and throws it in the trash. You have to provide, and I don't think that it changes the facts. I think it enhances the facts, and it makes it consumable, right? By presenting a narrative of why this is relevant to you, why it is important. What impact it has on society, what potential impact, what questions we might consider, and then you have the facts there. So it's important to tailor the content so that it is in fact consumable and interesting. Otherwise, it doesn't get published.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cappello. So the last question, and the one that I want to end on is there any way for students or recent grads to get involved with the Balkan Security Network?
Yeah. No, listen, again, we're open to speaking with everyone. I'm happy to share information, and so you could reach me at john@balkansecurity.org, and I'll share the two websites that you could also look at, and that has our contact information as well. But again, john@balkansecurity.org, and I'm be happy to continue the conversation. Thanks for asking that, though.
And thank you, Mr. Cappello, for taking the time to brief today. I'll end with a remark from someone that goes by Dragon in the live event Q&A. This person says, nevertheless, thank you for trying to rebuild broken bridges between two nations. It's respectable, and agree with that statement. And thank you so much for taking the time to brief us today.
Thank you again, Nicole, for your assistance, and to the organization. I enjoyed it, and I hope it was helpful.
Definitely was. All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks. We'll be in touch.